Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today is episode number 97. Crazy. We're almost at 100 episodes. And I don't know what I'm going to do for episode 100, but super excited for today's guest. So today's guest is John Moye, who is the co-founder of a company called Pro Se Pro. And basically, in very simple terms, Pro Se Pro helps individuals who have an immigration application or something pending for a very long time. They actually help these individuals sue the government to expedite their immigration journeys. For the immigration lawyers out there, this is typically done through Mandamus actions. And Pro Se Pro is basically a platform that is managed or rather kind of directed by attorneys, but really kind of helps us individuals go pro se, which means file for themselves. So it's a really cool product that, there's a lot of tech companies in the immigration space and more generally that talk about access to justice. And frankly, I think that this is one of those tools that walks the walk, more than many others. So I'm really excited to talk to John about Pro Se Pro, how it was founded, what the company does. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. I'm a former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. So I am the co-founder of Laborless, which automates H-1B visa compliance. And also the founder of GMI Rocket, which is a digital marketing agency for the immigration and mobility industry, and of course, which brings you this show. Before we jump into the episode, I do want to say a huge thanks to our main sponsor for the show, Lex Reception. So for those of you who especially are legal practitioners, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service. They provide and they answer calls and messages in real time to schedule appointments with prospective clients and with existing clients. They provide 24/7 legal answering specialists, so not just random people that don't understand the law, but actually individuals who do. And so that way you as a practitioner don't ever have to worry about, missing a call or an email from a prospect or a client. They can also proactively reach out to prospective clients if they fill out a form on your website. And they're very tech savvy, which of course is one of the reasons I really love them. They can integrate with Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and other platforms that you as a practitioner can use. So thank you, Lex Reception. If you're a listener of the show, they're offering $250 off your first month of service. So check the link in the show notes below, wherever you're watching or listening, or just reach out to them and say you heard about them from the show. Okay. So, John, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'm really excited to dig into your story and, of course, the story of Pro Se Pro.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Too bad I'm 3 shy of the 100 mark, but
I know. I don't think I have my 100th episode scheduled yet. And so now I'm wondering what I should do. Maybe I'll interview I don't know. I'll do something interesting, hopefully, something fun. But today's about you. So let's talk about you. So you, you're a co-founder of this really cool company. But your background is not in immigration law, per se. And we're going to talk about sort of how you got into this space, why you're a co-founder, how you met, the main, Brian, who really kind of birthed this idea, if you will. Brad, sorry, who birthed this idea, if you will. But let's go further back. For me, when I talk to folks who are leading companies, even in our industry, a lot of entrepreneurial spirit comes out, and I think that's what's really exciting to me about this show. So, I'm curious, how is your kind of growing up situation? Did you have any entrepreneurs in your family or business owners, or anything like that? Like, did this come from anywhere? I guess from when you were younger.
It's funny that I've only in recent years reflected on this, but yeah, my dad was a small business owner, ran a pension administration firm. And I never thought of him as a business owner. My dad just kind of worked all the time, and he wasn't like, honestly, we were a pretty middle class family. It wasn't like making tons and tons of money. And there was lots of months where there was tight money in the house because he had to pay his employees. And so there wasn't enough for him to get paid. So it was like, I always thought, oh, my dad is like this business person. And we're not crushing it. Like we're in America, like living the life and middle class. Sometimes, things are good. Sometimes things are not. and my mom was a teacher. So they're both kind of retired now, but yeah, he was a small business owner. I that kind of financial like insecurity definitely impacted my psyche in the way that I think about just my own personal security and like what's going on. Like that's a big part of my entrepreneurial spirit. I have to note, since you asked about my childhood, there's three co-founders of Pro Se Pro. The third one, Andrew and I have known each other since first grade. We lived down the street from each other, and we had a pretty thriving lemonade stand in our neighborhood in first grade that expanded into like a full like bodega where we were like going to Costco and buying all kinds of candy and stuff. And like, so we started lemonade, and we had this, we always joke, we've actually started a couple of things together, he and I. So I've got this great friend who also has kind of always pushed me. He and I have this great kind of, in school, we were really competitive with each other. We played soccer together. We were both kind of always pushing one another to achieve more. And so like we have this really great relationship where we challenge one another in a very healthy manner to do better. And so that's really worked its way into both this company and everything that we've done.
It's amazing because typically the lemonade stand is sort of the prototypical example, and I'll ask a guest like, hey, did you do lemonade stands when you were a kid, or car wash? You actually did a lemonade stand that turned into an enterprise, relatively speaking, as a kid. Yeah. So that's interesting. And so like, was that from, I mean, if I can ask, but was that from like the perspective of, okay, well, let me try to make some of my own money, like let me have some control over my own sort of security or fate, or how as a child, it's hard to say how we're really thinking about this, but is that did that push you and Andrew, I guess, together to say, we got to do this, that we have our own money, so we don't have to ask our parents or whatever? Was it? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think we wanted candy and we wanted Nintendo games. And so,
right.
yeah, I don't know if it was the money. I don't think it was the money as much as like, oh man, I want candy when I want it, and I want to get a Nintendo game. That's how, I'm a little bit older, but Super Nintendo, whatever. But yeah.
but exactly, that's the point, right? Like it wasn't the kind of thing where I want candy, let me just always go ask and get it. Like you had to get it yourself, and to get, to figure out how to find the means to get it. That's amazing. How old were you when you did this?
That was probably summer first grade, second grade. I think we did it for a couple of summers, but yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So then you do that. You go off then onto you go to college. I know College of Charleston. Did this sort of inform your desire to study business? Did you think to yourself, like, did this thread continue throughout your sort of childhood and teenage years, and you thought, okay, I'm actually going to be study business in college?
The business thing, I wouldn't say it was fueled by like, hey, I want to be an entrepreneur, so I'm going to study business. And in fact, the entrepreneurial thing, the spirit was always there. When I look back, I didn't connect those dots. It took a long time. So in college, I was like, well, I love Spanish. I studied Spanish quite a bit in high school, placed out of it in college, actually. So I was like, well, I'm going to keep doing this, the Spanish thing. And I'm going to study business because I think that's where I'm going to have the most opportunities when I finish college. So I ended up, kind of doing that double major. But as I neared the end of college, I was like, man, I really feel like I want to go make a difference in the world. And I went down to Latin America. I worked for a nonprofit and spent time working with youth down in mostly in Costa Rica, a little bit in Nicaragua as well. But for me, I look back at those things and I'm like, yeah, I was within an organization, and I was creating new programs. And, there's the term entrepreneur. And I think I very much embodied that, where I was like, hey, this isn't working. I want to build this new program. I want to launch this new thing. I'm in, like, here's how I'm going to do it. And kind of would just go off on my own. And not that I would go rogue, but I would definitely bring new things to the table and change things up and say, hey, we've got to do things differently. And so, yeah, I definitely wasn't a conscious like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to do this. That came later. But right out of college, it was like, I think business is going to be the best career for me, kind of. And then, well, I want to make a difference in the world, so I'm going to go do this. Then I was like, well, I also would like to have a family and raise a family. And that brought me back to the US to kind of start seeking different employment.
When you spent your time down in Costa Rica, now that you work for, a company that works with immigrants or prospective immigrants, did you, what was that experience like? Or did you even
Mhm.
think of it as an experience at all, kind of moving down there, going through any sort of visa process, obviously coming into, you spoke Spanish, but,
Mhm.
coming into a new culture, coming into a new environment, did that leave any kind of impression on you with respect to just moving to another part of the world and trying to set up some kind of a life?
Oh yeah. I mean, my perspective on the immigration world, not even just like policy, but just what it's like to be a foreigner living somewhere else, completely shaped. And for me, when there are no one invites me into policy discussions, nor should they. But when I hear other people having them, oftentimes it feels like the humanity is kind of removed, and it's like this very 10,000 foot. Let's not think about the people involved. Let's talk about it from this perspective. I think about it very much at that level, not only because I made great relationships and friends with a lot of people who want to immigrate here, but also because I was a foreigner in a different land. And yeah, it's a lot easier, frankly, for someone from the U.S. to be in Costa Rica. But I never I didn't get residency there. I wasn't allowed to work there. And so, yeah, it was a very formative experience to me that to this day, it definitely, well, forever, it forever molded who I am and the way that I think about what's going on in our country, and, how should we think about and treat people who are coming here.
Yeah, it's interesting, and you're right. It is something that we take for granted. The idea that somebody who holds an American passport can show up and at so many country um, borders and just be let in.
Mhm.
Even if it's just as a tourist,
Yeah.
but still, And I just recently I went to India and I had to apply. I haven't applied for a visa for a very long time.
Mhm.
Where I had to fill out an application and answer like pretty
Yeah.
personal questions and they asked me for my religion and I was, both my parents' names and where they were born. And I just haven't been asked those questions in a long time. And,
Yeah.
and I forgot even, and I'm in this on a daily
Mhm.
basis. And so,
Mhm.
even just that sort of little emotional flutter, if you will, of like, whoa, this is intrusive, but I want to go. And so I have to abide by their rules.
Mhm.
Um, so you came back to the U.S. From Costa Rica, and I guess you also then enrolled into business school or to get your MBA, right?
Mhm.
You went back to the College of Charleston, and I don't know what was that like. I mean, you were an intrapreneur, sort of. You. I guess it sounds like you weren't thinking of yourself, quote unquote, as a person who is going to start businesses. Yet you continued your education
Mhm.
from a business standpoint. Did you have any ideas at that time? Like, I'm trying to get into your head a little bit of,
Yeah.
you were sort of like the lemonade stand kid and you could have built an app,
Yeah.
at the age of 19, but instead you went to Costa Rica and did something totally different. So
Mhm.
you're kind of, these two worlds are starting to converge somehow. What were you thinking about at this point when you were kind of going to business school and, figuring out, I guess, next steps?
Yeah, the part of the change that happened in me in Costa Rica, I met a lot of people from a lot of different walks of life, and I started realizing, there's a lot of good you can do, and still build a successful growing company. And I think in college, my kind of tunnel vision or my just lack of understanding of how the world works, I was like, okay, if I need to do good, I need to go work for a nonprofit. And
Mm.
I connected those dots that, hey, I can do good, and you don't have to work for a nonprofit to be doing good things in the world. And I think that was the big shift that kind of happened, where I was like, I'm going to go back, I'm going to get my MBA, and really think about how can I make a difference in the world by building a business. And that was, ultimately that was kind of like the big shift there.
Interesting. Did you, and I was looking through your LinkedIn, of course, profile. Obviously, it shows you as the founder and COO of something called the Farm Stand.
Uh-huh.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you're on LinkedIn, it's like very corporate sounding
Yeah.
language. But what was it? I mean, I spent a lot of time in upstate New York. I
Yeah.
imagined a literal farm stand. Is
Yeah.
that what it was, or talk a little bit about that?
Oh man, I love the farm stand was my first like real kind of like post lemonade stand venture. Uh, that coming out of business school, I was kind of like, all right, I want to do my own thing. I'm ready to launch my own business, and had kind of baked through a lot of different ideas and kind of walked through just some financial modeling of what I think is going to work. Well, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, not really known for healthy eating. We're, deep fried Southern food here. And, my friends that, were in our mid to late 20s are like, we want to like eat healthy. So the farm stand, we kind of conceived of this notion of most of the businesses in Charleston, it's not like New York. This is a relatively small corporate market. The biggest companies are, 200, 300 people. There's a couple of 1,000 or 2,000 person companies. They don't have on-premise food options. So they're going out for lunch. And we're like, what if we could bring healthy lunches to them? This is early, this is 2012. So food trucks, again, they were probably popular in California, probably in New York. There weren't a lot of food trucks in Charleston. There was probably 3 food trucks here. So that wasn't a thing. We would set up a temporary kiosk in buildings in a like public area. And we would each day bring salad ingredients, pre-made wraps, soups, and things like that, just healthy food, and serve lunch during the day, and then pack up and bring them home, bring them back to our home base. We kind of had a ghost kitchen scenario. I found this restaurant that was open just for dinner. And I'm like, hey, what are you doing with the restaurant in the mornings? And they're like, nothing. I'm like, can I rent it? I'm like, yep. So this great situation, ultimately got it up to about 15 to 20 locations in the Charleston area, where we had, one of our little farm hands going out to a site each day. So that business, food and beverage, is widely known to be a game of thin margins. And I was grinding. I mean, I was up at 5 a.m. every day in the kitchen, prepping veggies, and filling in for, somebody would call in sick. So I'd, be prepping veggies. Then I'd go out to a site. Then I'd come back and do all the accounting and do all the marketing and try and sell more sites. And I was just, I got burned out after about a year doing that every day. So we were growing, we were growing, but I wasn't good enough at delegating, basically, is what it kind of came down to.
What ended up happening with did you just kind of shut it down eventually, or fizzle it out, or did you sell your assets to somebody, or?
This is one of the dumbest things. We didn't do any, we just were like, we're done. Like I actually had 2, you asked if I had raised money before we chatted. I actually did. I had 2 investors. So I raised money for this. And one of them was like, guys, I'm done. Like, John, you're burnt out. And like, I'm not ready to keep, I don't want to keep putting money into this thing to grow it. And I was like, yeah, I think I'm done too. And the other guy's like, all right. And I don't think anybody had the energy to necessarily, like, selling a business isn't nothing. And we just said, all right, we're shut it down. Now in hindsight, I'm like, if I had thought about it, we had a brand, we had all kinds of assets. We had all of our temporary kiosks. And we just I kind of gave them to the restaurant we were running to, because I was like, yeah, I'm done with this. I'm going to move on. It was dumb.
You were just out of business school, and I mean, what a learning opportunity. I mean, what an amazing story. And also, I love the whole concept of going to a restaurant, like being kind of industrious and going to a restaurant and saying, hey, can I just use your space? Like being really, really clever about that. And I'm really happy that they agreed. So that was your first entrepreneurial endeavor. Mm-hmm. And then it seems like you took a break from being sort of a business owner, and you got a job.
Yeah.
Maybe we can touch at a company called Wonderlic, right?
Yeah.
Maybe we can touch on that a little bit, but I'm just curious, sort of as an entrepreneur, what made you say, okay, great, quote unquote failed business, but tons of learning. What's next? Mm-hmm. There are probably people who would do that. It sounded like you were like, I need some stability, maybe, or a paycheck, or I don't know, benefits. Can you just share a little bit about that? What was your thinking at that point?
Yeah, I mean, it's not not anything radical. It's kind of all the things you said, but ultimately, the owner, Charlie Wunderlich, was one of my investors. And, when he's like, hey, this is what's going on in my company, I think you could come be a part of it, and basically express to me how I would be able to continue acting as an entrepreneur. And he would kind of continue mentoring me. That was, it was kind of an obvious, like, this is going to be great. And it was a fantastic experience. He's still a mentor of mine. And that's a fantastic company. If anybody needs, is trying to improve their hiring processes, I highly recommend checking them out.
Yeah, that's Wonderlic, Wonderlic. And and the reason I asked that is because, when I was practicing as an attorney and I had this sort of idea to build Laborless, and I obviously took the ultimate leap, I was still it was scary for me. And by the way, this is the opposite direction of going from having a full-time job to starting a business.
Yeah.
But in my mind, I always thought to myself, if this doesn't work out, total failure, number one, I will have learned something for sure. And number two, I'll probably land back on my feet. Someone will probably, hopefully, want to hire me as somebody that has, let's say, legal experience, in my case, plus starting a business. So I like that you shared that, because you went from being an entrepreneur. You could have, again, easily stayed down that path. You leveraged that to get, whether it was your connection and network with your investor, and then also your experience to get a job. Again, obviously, you did eventually go back to being an entrepreneur, so we will get into that.
Yeah.
But I just, part of the reason I started this podcast at all in the first place was because when I was starting Laborless, there was nobody to listen to in the industry, in the immigration industry, from an entrepreneurship standpoint. Listening to how Tesla started doesn't really help me in building, a niche legal tech product. So can you, I want to kind of, we do have a comment here, by the way, from Seth Finberg, saying he loves the term intrapreneur. Yeah, thank you, Seth. It actually, it's a comment I'd heard before, but maybe I listen to a lot of business podcasts, and so I hear that. But it is, I love it. It's the idea that if you have talent, especially in your organization, that have an entrepreneurial maybe bend to them and are talented or driven, like, give them some space to be creative and build something internally. You'll keep them. They'll be probably even more loyal to you as an employee. I mean, would you say that was your feeling as well when you were at Wunderlich, sort of getting some freedom, but while working underneath a broader organization?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that very much, again, I think that's what I was sold on when I was like, okay, I'm going to move from being an entrepreneur to going and working for a company and working for the man. That's what we always say, right? And knowing that was the case. And I think there's a lot of, I think some of the best organizations are the ones that do that really well. Google famously always had their, like, I think it was 10%. I don't know that that's the case anymore, but in the early days, it was like 10%. We want you to work on something that's not your normal job. And so many good things came out of that. I don't know if it was Google Analytics came out of that, or I don't know, a bunch of random, really great products that you're like, oh, this came out of somebody who was just like, hey, I'm going to work on this in my quote unquote free time, my 10% time. That's like the spirit of that entrepreneur, that they're like, we need to harness this. We have all of these great people. I think really good organizations do that well. I think Wunderlich is a fantastic organization. They're in the HR space, so they have to be on top of, like, what's best for human and professional development. And I think they are, and I think they were. So that's my reaction to that. I was just, if I can go back, one thing you said resonated with me about your perspective on, well, I'm gonna leave this job and start this thing because ultimately I believe this is a value add for who I am. And part of it also, what you said is, I'm going to create opportunities for myself by doing this. And I think ultimately that's a huge differentiator between someone who is really entrepreneurial and who's not. It's like, I'm going to place this bet on myself because I know that I'm going to have I might be leaving a job. I might be leaving something steady. I might be leaving something very secure. I'm placing the bet on myself because ultimately, I might feel like that's more secure than staying and working for the man. And I think the fundamental psyche of the entrepreneur is like rooted in that of, like, I'm betting on myself. And even if betting on myself means I might get a job later on, what I'm doing now is either going to help me get a better job or give me the skills to land, the next job that makes the most sense for me. So I very much, that resonates with me for sure. And I like, that's kind of the mindset I have, where I'm like, I've got friends who are, bankers and whatnot, and they're like, I don't know how you do it, man. And I'm like, I don't know how you do it. Like, this is the best. Like, it's stressful.
Right.
And, there's all there's pros and cons, but this is the way to be, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we can have a whole separate discussion about this, but the first year that I sort of, you know, laborless made money, like any money, it was barely anything. I mean, it was a small fraction of what my salary was, especially after kind of expenses and everything else. I was so proud of that, few $1,000s basically, because I made it out of nothing, and I feel like this is what I tell a lot of people who have ideas in school or in law school. I'm like, just try it, just get the feeling of starting your own business. I mean, I guess you had this back even when you were running your lemonade empire. Just the idea of my thoughts and my words and my actions can generate income, but really that's just a proxy for value, right? Like, these people wanted the thing that I have, and they wanted it in the way that I presented it to them. Like, what an amazing feeling. And I recommend everyone. I wish I had this sort of when I was younger. I think, my family came as immigrants. And so when you're an immigrant, you sort of, there's no foundation. You tend to gravitate towards a secure job. Right. And I think that's great. I wouldn't expect an immigrant family, unless they were already entrepreneurs themselves, to like risk, starting a business when you have nothing, no foundation. But
Mhm.
I love that. And I love the whole psyche. So, what I like about your background is that it's so eclectic, and I kind of almost want to touch on every single role you've had at every single organization. But I wanted to touch on two of them specifically before we get to Pro Se Pro. So you were, and I don't believe you were the co-founder, right? But you were at leadership at a company called The Link.
Mhm.
Um, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I just find it really fascinating, and there's something that I do want to tie back to our industry. But first, just to hear a little bit of your background on what this company did or does, and sort of why you joined them.
Yeah. And I'll give you a bonus on why I left them. But so the Link is in the construction tech space, and they are essentially a hybrid of a marketplace and a project management tool. So essentially, and it's very niche, super, super niche. It's a specific tool for engineers, designers, builders, and manufacturers of commercial aquatics. So think of people who are building and designing water parks or massive fountains like the Bellagio fountain, or any number of water rides at Disney. These are the cruise lines, the tops of the cruise ships that have basically a water park on top, where they have their own dedicated island. These are the people that do that work: the engineering, the design, the building, and the manufacturing of the equipment. Those were our customers. And the product was basically, let's provide a project management tool for the engineers and the designers and the builders. And we're going to make it really easy for them to use the equipment of manufacturers who are in the marketplace. So the manufacturers it's really kind of a marketing tool. So the real product was a marketplace, because what you're trying to do is convince these people. They're spending millions of dollars on water pumps. So if we could take a very small percentage of each sale, we're essentially another salesperson, another sales channel for the manufacturers. And so that was the business. It didn't take, because the value of the projects was so extreme, it didn't take a lot of customers to start making money. I came into the company because the founder of the company was actually a designer, an engineer and designer. He built the project management tool for himself, and he said, "Hey, I think that this other designers would want to use this tool." And he brought me in to sort of build this project management tool, and ultimately was like, actually, this makes more, like, the money is not in the designers using it as a project management. There's really like 25 of those designers and engineers that exist in the country. The real money is in the manufacturers who are making the margins. The margins on their products are insane. Like, that is a high margin, super specialty, but it's a high margin product. So there's a lot of wiggle room for them to pay.
Hmm.
So anyway, so that was an interesting product. I told you I'd say why I left. Because I was able to grow revenue. I think like in my first 8 months, I think I was able to grow it like 400%. It was like a pretty like
Wow.
massive like trajectory. But ultimately, it was what I would say. I acted as the founder, so the founder couldn't run it because there was a conflict of interest. So he became essentially an investor, and we were a separate entity that I ran. And ultimately, I would say it's a market founder misfit. I wasn't a good fit for me. And you look back to my background, I, you know, I was helping people build water parks. That I was just missing a little bit of like I'm helping change the world, and I tried to inspire my team, all the software developers and the customer support people, and be like, we're helping people like enjoy life to the fullest by like giving them these great water experiences, but like, it was a stretch. And I've heard other, I'm paraphrasing things from other speakers and other people, but ultimately for a product to work, there's got to be founder market fit.
Hmm.
And we might have had product market fit, sure, but I wasn't the right founder for that thing, because I just wasn't fired up and passionate and excited about helping somebody build a water park. I like water
Right.
parks, but I don't wake up and think about how I can help somebody build a new one.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. It's totally fair, and I can imagine that. You're, the idea of you being in Costa Rica and doing that kind of work, and then sort of going from that to building water parks is, just from a psyche standpoint, definitely
Yeah.
not on opposite sides of the spectrum, but definitely not super super close. But I will say though, and I'm totally making assumptions here, but if I were to tell a young person, or somebody who's thinking about taking an opportunity like that, why they should, I
Hmm.
would say that actually it was probably a good exercise in forcing yourself to be a fiscally responsible founder, even when you're not waking up just 100% passionate about it. I mean, if the
Hmm.
passion is there, amazing. And people
Yeah.
spend their lives looking for their passion. But you can't not do good work while you're looking for your passion. You still have
Yeah.
to show up and do your job, and, do a great job, especially if you're running a business. Do you think, like, in hindsight, maybe there was a little bit of like, yes, that wasn't totally aligned with you, but you built up a skill, which was running a business successfully, even when you're not, talking about it 24/7 and thinking about it. It was just work. The numbers
Yeah.
have to go up, and that's the skill that you built.
100% agree with everything you said. I mean, the experience for me, I couldn't be more grateful that I got to do that. I left because it wasn't a good fit, and I was like, I can't keep showing up and doing my best work because this isn't. It's basically I've squeezed all of the water out
Yeah.
of this rock at this point, and so it was the right time for me to go. But yeah, it was. I mean, I learned so much. You said something about me, going from my grad school to starting a company. I have nothing wrong with people going to grad school. I don't think a lot of people need to do it. I think more people that are considering going and getting their MBA should first think about running a business. I think the MBA becomes more valuable if you bring that set of skills and that set of experiences first. I mean, that I at least had some working experience, even though it was in nonprofit. I had some work experience that I brought when I came to grad school. I was one of the oldest people in my program, which I was pretty young. Everyone else was straight out of undergrad. And the ability to kind of, you could see a difference, and not just me, but some of the kind of older folks. I say older, we were like 27, like we were kids.
Right.
But like you could see the difference of like we have real life experience outside of college, and everyone else didn't. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a different experience, and I think it's
Right.
richer if you have it. I think it would have been even better had I had more of that entrepreneurial running a business. Like literally, you're seeing, as the business leader, you're seeing everything. You're not just, oh, it's not just I'm marketing. It's not just I'm customer support or sales or accounting. It's like literally the buck stops with me on everything. And so I need to understand everything, even if I'm not the one,
Right.
the like main person running it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. Yeah, there were a lot of kids that I went to school with, to college with, went to get their MBA right away, and it just now that I've run a couple businesses and just have had entrepreneurial endeavors, I sometimes think about how I'd love to go back to business school. I just don't want to go through like an accounting course right now because I know I would outsource that, but
Yeah.
the ability to take the higher level MBA classes, having run a business, sounds like a lot of fun. I
Mhm.
guess that's why they have executive MBAs. So okay, so you had this experience and you left. There were a couple of things that you were sort of doing between the link and founding Pro Se Pro. And again, I think we could have a whole other hour discussion talking about all of those things. We'll touch on one of them, which you're still, which is still going on, which is a learning, a learning child development, I guess, company.
Mhm.
But I want to move into Pro Se Pro.
Yeah.
Before we jump into that, I do want to pause just for a quick second, and it's a perfect time. We're moving into an immigration technology conversation, so I want to thank the second sponsor of this show and of this episode, DocketWise. So for most immigration attorneys listening, you probably have heard of DocketWise, but if you haven't, DocketWise is an all-in-one immigration case management platform. They have been around for quite some time and actually started as a company that helped individuals first before they became a company for immigration attorneys. It was called BorderWise, which is really cool if you go back into their history. So they provide everything from best-in-class immigration forms, which is really the thing that they that launched them into sort of top of the market. They provide really great questionnaires, integrations with all sorts of platforms, including Laborless, which is my startup. So I'm grateful to them for that. Great customer service. They're an awesome team. What I love about DocketWise specifically is they create a lot of good content. They just released a podcast. Now they're on episode, I don't know, like 20 something or 30 something with their co-founder, James. He's really great. His episodes are fantastic. So they they create content too to help the industry. And, they support this show. They've supported other things I've done. And I appreciate them for not just being, in business of selling something to lawyers, but also just creating, putting time and effort into creating value for the immigration ecosystem. So check out DocketWise for your case management, docketwise.com, or check out the link in the show notes. Okay, so with that, let's jump into your immigration tech journey, Pro Se Pro. I'm going to backtrack a little bit chronologically, which is to go back and ask you about, you've done all these interesting things, great, but I wouldn't then say, well, now that you've worked at an aquatics company as basically the founder and CEO, your next job is obviously clearly running, being co-founder of an immigration tech company. How did this come about, that where you were introduced to even the idea of Pro Se Pro? And I guess this really will go into what is your relationship with Brad, who is one of your co-founders?
Yeah. So I know this has been made clear. I usually say this at the beginning of anytime I talk with anybody, whether it's a customer or someone I'm telling about our product or whether I'm on an interview. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't expect I will be anytime in the near future. I do love learning, so maybe one day I'll go back to school and get that JD. But I am not a lawyer. We do have, and my other founder, Andrew, that I mentioned before, is also not a lawyer. He and I are both really technologists and have a lot of experience both in building technology as well as in marketing. He's actually a full stack engineer as well, so he's really in depth on the technical side. The third pillar of our organization is Brad Banias, who is an immigration attorney. I'd say he's a pretty well-known immigration attorney, especially in the world of Mandamus litigation. And Brad and I go back over 20 years. We were college roommates, so I've known him quite a bit, and I've followed his whole career from, obviously graduating college, going to law school, his clerkships with judge, going to what I don't even know what you call the kind of like extra layer of law school that you do after you get your JD, but doing that at Columbia and then working for the Department of Justice on behalf of USCIS, and then ultimately going into private practice and really setting a lot of precedent and being really a very early leader in, hey, unreasonable delays are by definition unreasonable, and they should not be allowed to persist. So I've followed Brad's journey just because we're close friends, and I know him, and we have conversations about work and about what's going on. And so in the course of our friendship, we've often talked about what he's seeing. And ultimately, he, like so many others, got into law because he wanted to help people. He got into the Department of Justice as he saw, through his clerkships and whatnot, he saw how the system worked. He's like, okay, I think I can make improvements from within. Join the Department of Justice. As many others who go to work for the government, you realize it's really hard to change from within. I also was an elected official. I served on city council here where I live. I had the same issues of trying to change systems within our city government, even a small city where I live, like dealing with bureaucratic policies and processes from within is very challenging, which is why he kind of left and went to the outside. So I'm hearing this frustration from him in normal conversations. And so over the course of both Brad talking with me and talking with our other partner, Andrew, and the three of us talking together, we were like, man, something's got to give. And the final catalyst, I would say, that was like, all right, let's do something, and let's do something now, was actually a series of social media posts from another lawyer. And I'll be honestly, I don't even know his name, so I couldn't name his name. I wouldn't. But this lawyer was online talking about how fantastic he was. He's like, look at how great I am. I have done all of these cases, and like 99.9% of them have settled, and that's how great am I, yada, yada, yada. And he's using literal case precedent that Brad set. And Brad's like, man, this guy, his clients are getting what they need, and that's great. But the fact that 99.9% of them are settling isn't because he's a great lawyer. Like, ultimately, it's because the case is such an obvious slam dunk that these people could probably do it themselves. So that kind of like light bulb moment of, wait a minute, why are all of these people spending outrageous fees on lawyers and going through all of these hoops of, there's nothing wrong with lawyers. Obviously, I partner with the lawyer, but there's certain case types that an individual can file and do themselves. And the social media post was an example of one of those case types. And so we kind of said, well, what would that look like? And ultimately, we envisioned this thing that was kind of like, well, it's in large part, it's kind of like a course or a playbook where you give somebody a guide of like, if you file things correctly, if you build the documents correctly, if you know how to serve summons, if you know how to do all of the steps of litigation correctly, the chances of this case being settled are insanely high. You're not going to go to court. You're not going to face a jury trial. You're not going to probably ever be before a judge. You're probably not even going to interact with the government attorney, because government attorneys hate pro se cases. And because these cases are such slam dunks, because the delays are so unreasonable, the easiest thing for the USCIS to do is actually just handle the application in the first place. And the one thing we can count on government employees to do, even though I think deep down most of them are really great people at their heart, but they're going to do the easiest thing for them to do. That's the culture that the government has created in itself, is like, follow the path of least resistance. In these cases, the path of least resistance is to handle the application.
And so the idea behind
I went way off the rails there. When you
no.
But I got on the soapbox for a second. I apologize.
As you should, as the co-founder, as you should. That's why you're here. But my question, I guess the follow-up there is, the idea is that so how does Pro Se Pro work? Or I guess I should say, how did it start? Because if the light bulb moment was, it's so funny for me to think about that, because obviously there's a lawyer that, as you said, obviously did what he was hired to do, and help these individuals settle their cases and therefore move their immigration processes forward, but sort of almost made it, too obvious that it's, especially if they're being settled, that like maybe his services are overkill is the point, right? Like, again, and I'm an immigration attorney. You obviously work with immigration attorneys. You partner with immigration attorneys that, we'll talk about this, how like, you may be there to support lawyers who don't do litigation, but they know that their clients may be helped by your product. Obviously, immigration lawyers are always just trying to do the best work that they can. But if I'm just an immigration lawyer that does this, I will be extremely happy that I'm helping all these clients and I'm getting them. But then, of course, if you're the kind of lawyer that also has like a scale or a technology mindset, you might look at that and say, well, okay, great. I've been able to help 5-10 people, but what if I take the steps that I've implemented to help these 5 or 10 people? Can I operationalize them? Can I systematize them and turn them into a product? Which is it sounds like what kind of Brad and you guys have done. So can you share a little bit about how does Pro Say Pro work? If I am a person who, if I go on your website, for example, and I look at the different products, at least that you have right now, it's U visa, EAD, Mandamus, right? So people who are applying for their U visa and they're waiting for their work permit, that's the difference between, like, as long as that case takes, or I should say, the length of that actual application and the whole process may differ depending on a lot of different things. But if that person is not able to legally work in the U.S., it is the difference between having a miserable life of, you're asking people for help versus working, which is, and same thing for, you have the H-4 EAD as well. I know during the Trump administration, there's a lot of challenges with the H-4 specifically, and then therefore the EAD. You guys also do EB-5 visa, I-829, and adjustment of status, advanced parole. So all of these things put certain life events on pause, whether it's getting a job or for advanced parole, traveling and going to see loved ones when you're waiting, when you're going through the adjustment process.
Yeah.
How does a person in these situations use Pro Say Pro?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like, I try to describe it as this kind of hybrid between, there is an aspect of a course or a playbook, whichever terminology makes more sense to you. But basically that DIY, like you're learning how to do it yourself, along with a little bit of software that the customers are getting access to. And the software is obviously it's empowering the course, so it's serving up the content. It's also guiding them through it's kind of the like hand-holded guiding through the process of how it works. But basically, they sign up with us and they provide us with a lot of information about their situation, where they are, and we help them create all of the documents that they'll need to file a lawsuit, to get it filed, and then we provide process serving services as well as part of it's like built into our packages. So we do the summons service on top of that on their behalf. And then we have a kind of, we always use the word community. It's not the best way to describe it, but we have this great community, again, part of our tool where, we've seen a lot of different scenarios. We've had hundreds of people go through our process, maybe thousands at this point. We're coming up on 1,000 very quickly, but many hundreds of people have used our service, and they've also, not every case is the same. And so they have different experiences. Like, oh, this is what I heard from the government attorney, or, the vast majority never hear from a government attorney. I should say that first. It's just like, I submitted it. I did everything I was supposed to, and my approval came in. When you serve summons to the U.S. government, you realize they have 60 days to respond to that summons. So that's where, like, our customers have an average response time of 43 days, where they get either a settlement proposal that says we're going to settle this within a certain time period, or they just get an approval. And that's about a 50-50 split. But the rest, they're the ones that are getting that settlement proposal. That's where they go on the form and they're like, hey, this is what I heard. This is what they called me, or they emailed me. This is what it said. And someone will say, yeah, me too. And here's what happened after I signed it. I got my I got my approval in 6 days, or I got mine in 3 weeks, or whatever it is that they got. So there's a really great kind of robust community of these pro se folks helping one another. And that's actually one of the really cool things that I would love to say. We went in thinking we would be doing this, but the level of empowerment that, you give to somebody, especially who's in that position. I mean, the U visa is a great example where it's like, this is somebody who they're a foreigner in the US. So there's already that fear that of like, oh, I'm a foreigner. Like there's all kinds of stress and fear that comes with that. Number two, they've been victimized in like a pretty horrendous crime. That strips you of something, like when you're a victim of that type of crime, to come on and they'd be like, but I myself am empowered, and I sued the government and I won. I sued the US government, me, an individual person who has been stripped of so much humanity, have done this. They get really, the community that we've got is really great for that reason, I think. And it's really cool to see people kind of, I wouldn't say come out of their shell, but just be like, look at what I did. And we're like, heck yeah, like we get to celebrate with you. Like, you're amazing. You did this on your own.
Yeah, especially when at the end of it is, again, work authorization, which allows them to then, sort of have a little bit more control over their own fate. And by the way, I should add, once that individual starts working, depending on their situations, but they can presumably start to amass some amount of financial means to pay for further legal representation if needed. You know what I mean? Versus like going to nonprofits and, worrying about the sort of very limited supply of pro bono work, or, really trying to do the all of it yourself, which is just, it gets increasingly hard. An application for Mandamus is one thing, but then going to court and, all of these things that people do pro se. I mean, people, it's crazy. I'm an attorney. If I was going to court for something, I would hire an attorney, if I could, I'm assuming I can afford it or whatever, but I can't imagine your English is not your first language, levels of education varied. People show up in court. It's crazy. Of course, the likelihood of not, getting success is greatly decreased when you file for yourself. So you guys are coming in at the very least empowering them from the beginning. So from a technology standpoint, because I'm interested, what I know that you said this isn't this is really a service that is tech enabled, right?
That's right.
Not like, but I'm curious, where do you see technology kind of going and with respect to the product?
Yeah, I mean, we're like, the way we use technology, as I said, is sort of to serve up, hey, here's what you're supposed to be doing. We also provide a lot of communications and updates through that. So it's like, hey, when we tap into the docket, it's like, hey, there's a notice of appearance from the government attorney. So that means like presumably something's happening on your case. So being able to kind of provide those kind of ongoing updates through the app is a really cool thing. So just continue to expand on that in terms of giving them that transparency and visibility. And again, like the empowerment that comes with that. A lot of times, people just want to know what's going on. And if you can give them that, that's huge. And when I speak to immigration attorneys, I know they feel the same. It's like, they just want an update. It's like, well, there is no news. If they feel confident that any news has been reported, then they're not, reaching out. So if you can the more we can be proactive in sharing, like, here's what's going on. So whether it's, hey, this notice came in, or it was entered in the docket, and serving that up with a little nudge in our app, that's a great thing. Where I see it going in the future, if you're talking about our technology, I don't know that I see a huge drastic change in our technology in the near future. The focus is really on building new cases, building new case, either finding new case precedent that exists from the work. Now we have to stand on the shoulders of giants. So we don't set case precedent. We find where case precedent exists and build on top of that. So we don't believe that it's a good idea to send someone pro se into something that's unproven.
Right.
So I should make that abundantly clear. Like, we think that would be a disservice to the immigration community, because then you could potentially set very bad precedent. So We're very, very thoughtful and intentional about the case types that we take on. And the assumption is there's going to be an extremely, insanely high settlement rate, and that the government is not going to fight it. That's really, if we're listing a case, that's what we believe is to be true. So for us, it's finding those new cases. And when we see there's an avenue for, hey, there's unreasonable delays that are happening in this area and there's no case precedent, it's finding people like Brad Banias. Obviously, he's a lawyer. He's not active in the day-to-day operations. What he does is we're like, hey, we're hearing a lot of people asking us, we're getting a lot of emails about this. Is there something that can be done there? And he's like, I'm going to do some research. And maybe I'll bring a case myself, or I'll go to someone else. I know that like Stephen Brown from Ray Newman in Texas, they do a lot of great work too. He'll go to someone like that and they'll put together a case, maybe group case, individual cases. And so I know there's a couple of things in the works right now that we're like, hey, when these come through, when and if these get approved, we're going to have new products and new cases. So it's less about the technology. I know that's what you're asking about. And it's more about how do we help more people through different case types.
Well, that's fascinating because, right, like your tool is sort of predicated on, as you said, certain precedent that allows you to feel really confident that you can serve up the service that you're serving. And so as you're thinking about it from a scalability standpoint, and then the question becomes, well, where else can we help people using our platform, our process, that can actually inform the type of potential litigation that can come before the government? If because there's so many different nuanced issues that fall through the cracks because maybe not enough people are bringing them up, or there isn't a big enough class action, a class of individuals to file class action. So there may be this sort of like self-fulfilling cycle of, well, what if we bring this lawsuit against the government, set new precedent that will be in the benefit of individuals, and then once we have that published, as an opinion, then we can go back to pro se pro and build a product sort of on top of that, which is fascinating. And what I like about this problem, what I like about this is that ultimately, it's just candidly, it's self-serving in a sense, right? Obviously, the idea is that it's both self-serving as an organization, but with the ultimate goal of helping people, which is the beautiful synergy of companies that can grow and also do good with vis-a-vis their growth. But it's also a self-correcting system. You can't file, frivolous lawsuits that don't benefit society because, you can, but they just won't be resolved in your favor. And then that can't be a product. And so in a sense, this actually forces you to almost start thinking about what else can we do from a litigation standpoint that can help people. And assuming that goes through favorably, that means that the government agrees, which is good. And then you could build product on top of it. So it's actually really, because I guess my point is I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent, but one can look at this model and say, well, what if we just, pass laws that will benefit us, if you will, and then we can build tools or whatever, right? But this isn't that. This is challenging the government within the bounds of the law, and then only the things that are truly right will get resolved from a legal standpoint, and then that becomes precedent. So you're almost lucky to be in this because you can feel really good about growth, like really good about growth.
Yeah.
Which is cool, unique and cool.
Yeah. Well, I'll say one more thing about the future. We are completely tunnel visioned at the immigration world right now, and I think will be for the next couple of years. But ultimately, I view Pro Se Pro as a tool to create, frankly, greater government accountability. And it's really, where is the government falling short and acting in an unreasonable manner? Particularly as it relates to processing delays. There's a lot of things that government processes. There's a lot of things that shouldn't take long. The U visa application is a great example. It takes like 45 minutes to an hour, something like that. It might even be less to process those applications, but they're waiting 5 years, and they're just told to wait without a work visa, without any kind of bona fide or waitlist decision. Just like, well, sorry, like the law enforcement needs you. Like, you're sponsored by law enforcement to be here. So stay here, but you're not really protected and you can't work. But because it's going to take us 5 years to go through your 1 hour application. And like, that's a little bit of hyperbole, but it's not too far from the truth. And so in those cases, we should be filing lawsuit. Those things happen outside of immigration as well. So for us, in terms of growing, it's like, yeah, right now we're solving these problems, but our hope is that we force USCIS to fix the system. That is ultimately, we want to bring about systemic change, and it's a death by 1,000 cuts. It's like, make this untenable so they fix the process and then move on to the next broken process.
And when you say untenable, you mean by volume of litigation claims, essentially, because you're making it effectively easier to file, in good faith, in this case, mandamus actions.
Yeah. And a lot of the mandamus actions are group suits, right?
Right.
It's about the same amount of work to handle a group suit as it is an individual suit. So when you're faced with 100 people in one group suit, you'd much rather that than 100 pro se cases for a lot of reasons, but certainly. And what we hope to do is we're not pressuring the USCIS directly, because the people that are handling these is Department of Justice. We're relying on them to pressure their sister agency to say, yo, like, this is broken. Clearly, this is broken. Do something to fix it. And we have to make the cost of inaction, the pain of inaction, greater than the pain of actually putting the effort to make changes and improvements. And that's what we're trying to do.
That's awesome. Interesting. For the immigration lawyers and other sort of professionals who may be watching or listening to this, what's a way that they can engage with Pro Se Pro, or whether you personally or with the organization, like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up. There's a couple of different ways. Number one, we have immigration lawyers who, they're like, hey, I'm a petition attorney. I don't do litigation. I don't want to do litigation. But I know that my clients have been waiting for a long time. And actually, we have relationships with lawyers now, as well as some legal aid clinics, so some work with nonprofits to help their clients out. And we just, they're like, hey, let's set up just like a kind of official channel to refer clients. So that's one thing that we do, where we just kind of have a very streamlined referral process in place with lawyers and legal clinics, or the lawyers at legal clinics. So if someone's interested in that, they can email me, john@prosepro.co. So that's part number one. Part number two is, honestly, like, we get people asking us what lawyers they should be recommending. And so I'm always on the lookout for really good petition attorneys, because we don't do any forms. One of the cases we have is overseas parole. So we help U-Visa folks who have derivatives overseas that, by all rights, they should be able to enter the country, but it's not happening. So we've got a service that helps them sue to get their derivatives into the country. Well, once that decision has been made, there's like DS 160, there's some work that needs to be done that we don't handle. And so we look for lawyers, usually it's their existing petition attorney, but I'd say a good bit of times they've either, severed relationship with their attorney, or whatever, it was a one-time service, or they're just like, I want to switch. And we're always looking to build up our list of like, hey, I'm a good lawyer. I would love for you to send people my way, would love to chat with anybody who's like, hey, we would love to get folks from you. So I don't know if that is a clear enough answer. We don't have like a partner's formal application or anything. You can just email me directly and we can set up a call.
Yeah. And maybe eventually, you will. And especially if the vision of Pro Se Pro starts to come to fruition, where you expand, you really cover a lot within immigration. Maybe you start expanding into something else. I can imagine a broader community, a partnership opportunity, whatever come up. But yeah, I just was curious, because I think especially, the second, the latter thing that you mentioned is sort of like referrals from you to attorneys, which of course every attorney will be happy to get work. But the first one is really interesting, because, litigation has become much more popular and much more productive over the last, I would even say, 5 to 7 years. And when I was practicing, which now is forever ago, which is wild, I just didn't hear about litigation too much. And then it became like during the Trump administration, it started to become more common. And now it is quite common. And so a lot of attorneys see the merit, but don't handle it. And so knowing where they can go to at least help their client take that first step, with you, for example, is great. And by the way, there's no G28 because it is still pro se, right? There is no client representation, if you will,
Right.
in these.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're very explicit about that. There's no client relationship between attorney-client relationship or privilege with us and our customers.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, to your point, yeah, the lawyers that want to work with us, again, when you take on an immigration client, often you're working with them for years, and so adding on a layer of another service on top of all the other things that you're doing, it can be a lot. And for some people, it makes sense to do litigation, and honestly, some of our customers don't want to do pro se, and nor should they. We kind of have this, like, we talk about, here's when it makes sense to do pro se, here's where it doesn't. It doesn't always. Sometimes people do need a lawyer. People need a lawyer for a lot of things. Sometimes even for the litigation that we do, somebody should use a lawyer. EB5 is the best example, where it's like, all right, they're not necessarily, they probably can afford a lawyer, so it's not necessarily about the cost savings, even though everybody likes to save money. But some people are just like, I want to be totally hands off, and I just want to pay my lawyer and have them do it. And I get that, and that's a certain type of person. So I think we have kind of a very good relationship with most immigration lawyers, where we're like, hey, if you don't do your work well, our work their paperwork needs to be in order.
Right.
And the immigration lawyers who are doing the litigation for their group or individual suits, they need to do good work to set good precedent. So, like, yeah, we very much love we love really good lawyers who ultimately, if they're looking out for their client's best interest, and their first thought is, what's going to serve my client the best? That's the perspective we take. Where, I try to talk people out of using our services most of the time. They're like, should I use you or not? I'm like, probably, if you're asking me that question, probably not, because like you need to be confident in what you're doing. So if you're not sure, then talk to your lawyer and see what they think.
Yeah, totally. And I think that synergy is becoming more and more prevalent as more tech companies are popping up. I think there will have to continue to be a partnership between tech and tech-enabled services like ProSay Pro and others, and just the standard immigration bar.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason I love the show, and I'm grateful for guests like you, is to really educate the immigration bar about what's happening, what companies are out there, what ideas are coming to life, and sort of for lawyers to start thinking about how everything fits into the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that. Well, John, thank you so much. This has been an awesome conversation. I hope to have you back on in the future as ProSay Pro continues to blossom and offers even more, especially if and when you start to expand beyond immigration. In the meantime, I wish you guys the absolute best, and excited to see the growth. Thank you for sharing your story and for coming on here, and appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much. Delighted and honored to be here.
Thank you. All right, everybody. Amazing episode. So nice to see. I love the whole business model. I know I talked about this, but this whole idea of the growth of the organization as it grows just continues to bring so much benefit to not just the clients, but the industry. I love that. It's rare to have that built into a business model, and this is really, really fascinating to see. So I'm excited to see where ProSay Pro continues to go, and I'm sure we'll all be following the organization. Just want to say thank you again to Lex Reception for being the main sponsor of this episode. And just as a quick recap, if you missed the intro, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and support service, from everything from answering phone calls and messages in real time to scheduling appointments. The Lex Reception provides immigration law firm clients, so the law firms, right, with 24/7 specialists that will, again, answer your calls and your emails. They can also do sort of outreach to folks who reach out to your firm through a form or through kind of email, etc. They integrate with tech products such as Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and more. And for listeners of the GMI Rocket Show, $250. That's $250,000 off your first month. of service with them. So check out the link in the show notes, or just reach out to lexreception.com and tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thanks for the comments. I missed one comment here from Anandita. So great to see you. Exciting conversation. Thank you, Anandita. Appreciate you tuning in, and I hope to see you. I missed some of your firm's events in the DC area, which I'm bummed about, but I will get there eventually, and I'm excited to see you and your team very soon at some conferences. So thank you for the comment. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Have a wonderful weekend, and see you next week or in 2 weeks. Not sure yet, but see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Peace out.